Thank you for the rousing start this morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, where our mission is to join together to create a nourishing, liberal, religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world, or as we say each morning, create community, find meaning, and work for justice. We're glad to have you with us this morning. Our church is a welcoming congregation, and we appreciate your unique experiences, backgrounds, beliefs, and lifestyles. If you're one of our long-term members or have been here a short time, or if you're joining us today for the very first time, we're so glad you are with us. We're also glad with those who are streaming with us today. We appreciate your taking part in our service as well. It is also my pleasure this morning to welcome our guest speaker, Breean Beggs. Breean's the president of the Spokane City Council, and I will be giving more of an introduction and more details later on in the service. But I have no announcements this morning, so now please just take a few moments to greet each other and to say hello to someone you haven't met yet. Thank you. What a rousing bunch this morning. We'll have more time later on after the service for more conversation and great coffee. So what I'd like to do now is to turn from our informal greeting of one another to formally beginning our service by lighting our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, the symbol of our unity and solidarity, of our openness and inclusion, of our community and individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need. And may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt where it has been found. The opening reflection this morning is from Stephen Erickson. He says, "We humans do not understand compassion. In each moment of our lives, we betray it. We know its worth, yet in knowing, we then attach to it a value. And we guard the giving of it, believing it must be earned. Compassion is priceless in the truest sense of the word, and it must be given freely and in abundance."
Our first in-service hymn this morning is number 133. I think I'm on the wrong page. Okay. It's 134. Our world is one world. You can access the words up on the screen or with your hardback hymnal if you wish. Please stand as you're willing and able.
We will now kindle our candles of care. And each time we gather as a congregation, there are always those who are with us in our minds and hearts, and who we want to wrap in our love and care. Let us share a moment in silence, embracing others who are here and here in our hearts and minds this morning. And you're welcome to say their name aloud as you are willing. Those named aloud and those embraced in our silence, and all those who are suffering elsewhere in our world at this hour, we hold in our community of compassion. We now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains this community and its mission to the larger world.
Thank you so much. At this point, it's time for our story for all ages, and kids are welcome to come on down to listen to a story. All right, today's story is a true story, and it was first written by Isabella Hatkoff, Craig Hatkoff, and Dr. Paula Kahumbu. Our story took place almost 20 years ago on the east coast of the African country of Kenya. A terrifying storm called a tsunami had left a baby hippo stranded on a reef. The baby hippo's name was Owen, because that's the name of the man who eventually was able to rescue him. But he couldn't go back to the wild yet because he hadn't yet learned how to defend himself. And he couldn't join another hippo pod because they would think he was a danger to them and they might attack him. Owen had no home. And that's when Dr. Paula stepped up to help. She worked at an animal shelter about 50 miles down the coast, and they had a special area in the park that they thought Owen would like. There were tall trees and low bushes, and what hippos liked most, a muddy pond. There was also a turtle who was 130 years old, but everyone knew he was basically an old curmudgeon who liked to keep to himself. The turtle's name was Mzee. Well, by the time Owen arrived at the shelter, he was very tired and weak. So tired and weak that when he was brought to his enclosure, he ran straight for Mzee the turtle and hid behind him. Why such strange behavior, you might ask? Well, baby hippos often hide behind their mothers if they're feeling scared or threatened. Owen had made Mzee his protector. And if you can see a picture here, is Owen the hippo hiding behind Mzee, the 130-year-old turtle. Mzee wasn't too thrilled about his companion at first, but the two became inseparable. They ate together and they swam together and they even figured out how to tickle each other. But most importantly, they trusted each other. Scientists have tried to figure out whether Owen made Mzee a mother, a father, or just a very good friend, but they haven't arrived at any clear conclusions. What is clear is that Owen wasn't alone as he recovered from the trauma of being separated from his family and stranded at sea. Thanks to his connection with an old turtle, and thanks to the compassionate human helpers at the animal shelter, Owen finally had a place to call home again. And now join me in singing our children out to Play Club.
As we move into a time of meditation, I encourage you to find a comfortable position. Put your feet on the floor. Close your eyes if you wish. Take a deep breath in and breathe out as you reflect on these words from Thomas Aquinas. Fear is such a powerful emotion for humans that when we allow it to take us over, it drives compassion right out of our hearts. For my reading today, I'm sharing the words of Sharon Salzberg from the December 2019 Journal of Touchstones called, and that journal was on compassion. She says, "Compassion is the strength that arises out of seeing the true nature of suffering in the world. Compassion allows us to bear witness to that suffering, whether it is in ourselves or others, without fear. It allows us to name injustice without hesitation and to act strongly with all the skills at our disposal." Thank you, Karen and Maura. That's beautiful. I'm always amazed at how someone can put so many notes together and make them all work, you know? So, at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Breean Beggs. He's the president of the Spokane City Council, and for more than 20 years he has effectively presented causes and cases to juries, appellate judges, mediators, community groups, and the media. Highlights of his work include substantial police reform in connection with the death of a mentally disabled janitor in Spokane, substantial national reform on oil pipeline safety in connection with the death of 3 children in the Olympic pipeline explosion, and multiple jail and criminal justice reform issues in Spokane County. He is currently leading efforts to increase housing units in Spokane, decrease homelessness and crime, and facilitate community conversation on equity and inclusion. Breean is married to another social change lawyer, Laurie Powers, and they parented 3 now grown children together near Manito Park in Spokane. So please join me in welcoming Breean Beggs.
So first, it's great to be with you. I've been in this building so many times over the last 18 years that I've been back in Spokane, oftentimes at this lectern, but never on the Sunday morning and in this space. And so thank you for having me. I see many of you who I know and love, and that is an extra special experience for me. And just to give you a peek behind the curtain, what I'm trying to do today is talk about belonging in Spokane. And in some ways, I don't need to tell this group about the importance of belonging and acceptance. You all get that pretty well, and you live that in your lives and as an institution. But I wanted to talk about what I've been thinking about it lately, and the challenge of othering and belonging as a cure in ways that we can talk about it to our neighbors and our coworkers and our family members. Because if you haven't noticed, Spokane, like most of the country, is divided. And you can do the dichotomies. You can do the county, the city council, the mayor. You can do it by the indigenous peoples who've been here for thousands of years trying to survive our presence here. Other racial disparities, economic, who's housed, who's not housed, political, religious. So we have all this divide in this community and the country, and I am super interested and have been for most of my professional life of bringing people together. And so I'm curious about what are ways that we do that in Spokane. So one way that I'm embarking on that is I'm in campaign mode today, not for elective office, but for a new City of Spokane motto, okay? And the current motto, you might know, it's not that old, it's the city of choice. And that's always kind of bothered me because it kind of implies that where you live, whether you have a job or not, what your health is, where you stand socially in the community, like, is your choice. And like, if people would just choose better, everyone would be happier. And that just seems wrong, and it seems divisive. And so I've been looking for what's another motto that might bring healing, lead to justice, and bring us together. And so about a year ago, while I was going through some inclusion and diversity training, it kind of came to me. In Spokane, we all belong. In Spokane, we all belong. Just feel that for a moment for yourself, and then imagine for people who are marginalized in our community, what that might feel like if they're at City Hall or in Riverfront Park or anywhere else in the city, and they feel, I belong, I'm in Spokane. So that's what I want to get the city to adopt. So I'm going to need your help out there when the campaign becomes a little more visible, but we're working on it. And I'm excited about it because it really calls Spokane to become more of the beloved community. And we've heard that before from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King on the beloved community, but it actually came from a philosopher in California by the name of Josiah Royce. And as a side note on my history is I actually went to Head Royce School for junior high and part of high school in Oakland. It was named after him. I had no idea. He was the creator of the beloved community. But the idea of the beloved community is to have an achievable manifestation of the biblical kingdom of God. For those who think the kingdom of God, as it's described in the Bible, of the lions and the lambs laying down with each other, is just a little too pie in the sky, the beloved community is, no, how could we make this real? And the core of it is this: all people in the community share in the community wealth. And that poverty and racism and homelessness are not tolerated, not because of a law, but because of the community and cultural norms, that we're just not going to have that here. So I want to go in that direction because I see the fundamental problem in Spokane as being othering. And I don't care what the issue is, and we'll talk about some criminal justice, police reform, housing, racism, sexism, all ageism, all different things. What the core problem across the specifics of the manifestation is this concept of othering, where I as an individual will other someone, where we as perhaps a family or a friend group or a company or an institution, we will other people and say, yeah, we don't really have to pay attention to them. They're different than us, and their pain is not our pain, and we are not called to action to remedy what their challenges are or to empower them to be all who they are. So we could spend a lot of time on another sermon, probably days and weeks, talking about why human beings other each other. But what I would like to do is focus on a curative response. And that is this belonging idea. And something that I've heard about called, how do we expand the circle of human concern? How do we expand the circle of human concern? And I'm inspired today by University of California, Berkeley professor John Powell. And he is the director of its Othering and Belonging Institute. So shout out to UC Berkeley for having an Othering and Belonging Institute to study this, what I think is just critical to how we live together and thrive. And his whole piece is that we each individually and families and as a community and culture and even as a nation, we have this circle of human concern, and some people are in it, and then other people just aren't. They're still human beings. And it might be because of the color of their skin or their culture or their lack of education or their too much education, or it might be their language, might be their political beliefs. But for whatever reason, some people are in our circle of human concern and some people aren't. An example that struck me in the last couple of weeks is down 195 about 2 weeks ago, there was a wildfire out there. You might remember it. It closed down 195, and hundreds of people were displaced out of their homes. Immediately, those people were set up in shelter for the housing. Immediately. They were in, as homeowners in southeast Spokane, they were within the circle of human concern in Spokane. And their needs were taken care of. People understood it. Oh my gosh, wildfire, you don't have any control over that. Let's take care of you, until that ended, and then they went back to their homes. But I'd like to contrast that with, if you go east in Spokane, which is often outside the circle of human concern, there's a place called Camp Hope, where there's 600 human beings surviving there. And for the government, and for the majority of the community, they are not in the circle of human concern. In fact, people hope they would just go away. Some people want to put them in jail. And even in the triple-digit temperatures that we had a few weeks ago, some volunteers erected a cooling tent to help them. And the city government on the other side of the building from me wanted to shut that down. They couldn't even have the cooling there. And they weren't, again, treating them like the people along 195. They were treating them differently. Now, there were great folks and groups that have stepped up to try to help the people who live in Camp Hope, and they serve them food and they bring them clothes. But we're still in this huge conflict over whether or not those human beings are entitled to the same concern as homeowners on 195. So we could expand that to other conditions, and I'll get to that in a little bit when I'm going to cover some things that the city is up to that I thought you might want to know about. But in listening to John Powell, and by the way, if you go to the website of the Othering and Belonging Institute, or you just Google John Powell on YouTube, you can hear his words and his wisdom, and as one introducer said, he is a prophet, and he definitely is. So there's a lot that you could cover and learn, and I really commend him and that to you. But one thing I wanted to pick out for purposes of today is he talked about a personal practice that I'm like, oh, okay, I could do that, and maybe you could too. And he described a traditional greeting for the indigenous people in South Africa. So just like we would say good morning or good afternoon, or even how are you, they have a term, they call it Sawubona. Sawubona. And that's spelled S-A-W-U-B-O-N-A, Sawubona. And he describes that what it means literally in their language is, I see you. I see you. And some people interpret it even more broadly. We see you. We see you. And we're talking about the we as the entire community, and not just today's community, but our ancestors. We see you. We see your value. We see your needs. We see how you are part of the community. And we are committed to empowering you and helping you feel like you belong. It's just words, and perhaps, like here, the good morning, which has a great intent, or the how are you that seems to telegraph concern, maybe that just goes by the way and people don't think about it. And I don't really recommend that you go out tomorrow and say Sabana to people, because unless they were here, they won't know what you're talking about. But I think it's about my intent when I am seeing someone. Am I seeing that whole person? Am I seeing what they need? And not that I can solve everybody's problems, but am I being aware of it? What do they need to be part of our human community in Spokane? I think that has profound impacts for the people who feel that intent if I'm interacting with them, and for me and how I interact with people. And so I'd like you to imagine how that practice might impact the community around you and how it might impact you. And so even though you've already said hello to each other, I'm going to invite you for a little bit of participation here in just a minute. And I'm going to ask you to find someone nearby to say, I see you, and really have that intent that I see you. And if you can, pick, you probably know most of the people that are around you, but pick the person that you know the least. Again, this is a good safe space. It's way different than just out in the community doing it. But if you could stand up with me and just for a moment, find somebody and let them know, I see you. Okay, all right. I will. All right, I see you. I see you coming back to your seat. Clearly, you are going to be great emissaries for belonging in Spokane. So thank you for engaging with me. And just one last little vignette about that. I don't know how many of you saw, David Brooks from the New York Times had a column that was published in the Spokesman in the Saturday edition, which is online, so you may or may not have seen it. But he called to mind a daily issue that he has, is he's on the subway train, and he notices everybody has their headphones in and nobody is talking to each other. And he just thought, how strange is that? This is the opportunity in a relatively safe space to meet people that you don't know that are from different neighborhoods and different cultures and share your lives with each other in a way, just briefly, and enrich each other. And he did some research on it, and what he found is that when they've studied why people don't strike up conversations with people on the bus or the airplane or the train, is that they predict, their brains tell them, our brains tell us, that this will not be a happy conversation. That is what most people's brains tell them. This will not be a happy conversation, so let's just avoid it. And he found other research that says when they actually artificially force people to have conversations with people they don't know or have anything in common with, they don't think, they actually love it. They're actually enriched. They feel better. They feel more alive. And so we've got this thing going on, and I don't know why it is, of we don't want to talk to people because we fear it. But it turns out it's very self-destructive. And I was just thinking of myself. I'm like, okay, well, if you know me, I'm pretty outgoing, and if on the curve of things, I'm more likely to talk to someone than some people. But I'm the same way. I'm just thinking, I've been doing a little bit of flying in the last few months, and I'm like, no, I just want to read my book or do my work. I don't want to talk to anyone. But a little exception, a guy got on the plane from Seattle with me, and he had a Whitworth University t-shirt on. And I went to Whitworth University, so my brain told me this would be a productive conversation because Whitworth alums are great. And so we did. We talked the whole way. It was super engaging, way more interesting than my book. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I had that cue, but how many people have I not spoken to on an airplane or on the bus coming from downtown up to the South Hill? Because I don't care or I don't know. How many interesting people could I have met and learned about? And especially, I'm the city council president. I need to get to know these people in my town. So I was struck by that. And then one other thing that I was struck by in thinking about this is many of you know that last year I was diagnosed with throat cancer and had surgery and chemotherapy and radiation. And so I got to learn a whole new community inside of our community, which is daily radiation. And I hope most of you haven't had to go through it or know anyone, but basically you go every day at the same time for about 15 minutes. And they have you in kind of a cattle call area with other people who are doing the exact same thing. And there's a cultural norm. We don't talk to people at the medical office. We don't do that. It's private. We don't do that. But, after a couple weeks, because it's the same group of people, their appointments are either right before me or right after me, we did start to talk. And we were all very different parts of town, different cultures and beliefs, but we did have something in common. We were trying to survive cancer, and it strengthened us. It strengthened me to talk with these people, and we were all in different shapes, physically and health-wise. But I remember each of those people distinctly, and they walk with me now, just there. I have them with me on my team of health and recovery. And so I commend that to you. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some practical application and also what's going on at the city. I've always loved the chance to tell you what's really happening in the city as opposed to what you read on Facebook or Twitter or the newspaper sometimes. Although lately, the newspaper's been getting it better, so I'm happy with that. So I'm going to talk about a few things: homelessness, criminal justice and police reform, climate chaos, interpersonal exclusion. But I've noticed in almost all these areas, in addition to this othering and belonging piece, there's also kind of a dichotomy of different groups othering each other. And so while most of these issues, probably we have a lot in common of, we've seen the evidence, we know the data, we know what to do, and we know what's politically correct from our culture. There's another group that feels othered by us. And then when it really gets confusing to me is sometimes we feel the need to other people because they're othering people. And so it gets a little crazy. And so what I'm reflecting for myself is, okay, again, going back to Dr. King and his practices of nonviolence is like, okay, let's just get to the core of it. Let me be what I want to see in the world and do that. But just to give you some examples of that, going back to homelessness. So I've been out to Camp Hope a few times, and I've talked with the people there and engaged and gotten to know what's going on for them. And then recently, the state announced that they are going to provide some money to buy the Quality Inn up on Sunset, not too far from here. And they're going to turn it into apartments. They're going to have social workers there. They're going to curate the people who come who are ready to live independently and there. And it sounds like a good solution to most people that there. But the people, I shouldn't say the people, some people who live in the West Hills neighborhood have been coming down to City Hall. They've been picketing and boycotting, and they speak at the end of our meeting. They have open forum. And what they've been saying is, you are othering us. You have not taken us into account. You don't care about us. We are worthless to you. We are going to be sexually assaulted by these people coming in. Our property values are going to be devalued. Our possessions are going to be stolen. Our children are not safe anymore, even when they live 2 miles away from this hotel. So they come with a lot of passion, and it's really challenging for me to be in that space because I'm like, oh no, the Camp Hope people are being othered. But I'm realizing that these people are feeling othered because they didn't have much agency or power in deciding who was going to buy and run that hotel. And so that's just, that's there. There's not a great solution other continuing to engage and continuing to treat them as also within my circle of human concern and not just discounting them and saying, oh, you're a homeowner, what do you have to worry about? Because they have human concerns as well. But a couple of things that we're doing at the city to help expand the circle of human concern on homelessness is we've gotten to a new philosophy. I call it Housing First 2.0. So Housing First is the idea that the first thing, if you have someone that's homeless, you need to give them some kind of shelter because they can't address their mental health issues, their job finding issues, their relationship issues. If they have a substance abuse issue, which not everybody does, but some people do, they can't address that until they have a place that they know they can lay their head at night and they're safe and they can get a good night's sleep. So that's Housing First 1.0. But 2.0, we're realizing, is you need a little more than that. You need some privacy. You need to have a door you can shut and lock and keep your things safe in. You need to know that you can come back the next night. And you need to have access to wraparound services that can help lead you now that you're physically stabilized, you're fed and you're housed and you're clothed. What's your journey to climb out of where you've been? And so that's what we're working on now in terms of our priorities for money on homelessness, is privacy with a door you can lock and services. The other piece on homelessness, a little further upstream, is just housing generally. Most of you probably are homeowners, and you're quite insulated from the housing crisis in this community. If you're trying to rent a place, the rents have almost doubled in the last few years. And if you want to be a first-time home buyer, you just can't do it on the kind of typical wages. If you move here from Seattle or Bellingham or LA, maybe you can cash out your equity and you're fine. But there's a whole generation of people that are being financially othered into just being renters and at the whim of their landlord. So one thing that we did, I'm very proud of, we created laws that allow what we call missing middle housing. Duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes in neighborhoods all over the city. There used to be the rule that you could only have a single detached house in a neighborhood for most of the neighborhoods, which drove up the price. And by allowing these missing middle housing, we can have all kinds of people. I happen to live on a block, currently on 17th, that's zoned multifamily housing just for my block. And I have an apartment building on one end, and I have duplexes and triplexes to either side of me. And it's interesting, in my neighborhood, On my block, just that block, there's a lot of people of color. There's a lot of differing incomes because it allows housing access to different people. And we, after years, decades and decades of people fighting tooth and nail not to let duplexes or fourplexes into neighborhoods, we voted 7-0 to allow them. And we're the first real place in the entire state to do it. And Seattle is like, what? Spokane? But I keep saying, when Spokane leads, Washington follows. So we're doing that. If I turn to police reform and criminal justice, there's a real dichotomy in the police reform that I've noticed. So I marched in the Black Lives Matter marches a few years ago with many of you. And we got it. We're like, oh my gosh, we have been othering people of color with our police as an institution. And if you go back in time, they were originally set up to enforce slave laws. And there's all this data about stops disproportionately to arrest and how they're treated. And so all the data is there that people of color are being othered by our police. And that's again, it's not really that controversial to me. But it's interesting, I was in small meetings with our police officers, private meetings, and they're feeling othered as well. And I saw police officers in uniform with tears coming down their face for feeling disenfranchised and othered from their community. They don't understand what happened. They were the trusted guardians of our community, and now they're being blamed for so many things. And I realized that we're not going to solve police relations in the community until we address the othering of police as well. And again, that doesn't mean carte blanche, we're not going to change things. It just means we have to take that into account. And on criminal justice reform, I've been to several meetings in this building on smart justice, and I know a lot of you know that and support that. And the idea on smart justice really is you treat each person that comes into the system who's broken the social norms, committed a crime as we've defined it, and you treat them as an individual, and you figure out what are their needs to stop doing this. What do they need? And it's different for everyone. And our system legally is set up very different. Treat everyone the same, and really you have to punish them and make them suffer a bit, and then the world will be better. Totally counterproductive. As it turns out, the number one factor for people reoffending, how many days in jail they've had. That's the number one. Re-traumatizing doesn't help. So we've been progressing on smart justice, and what the city is doing is we are expanding what we call therapeutic problem-solving courts. And those are courts where people, the goal, they're not going to jail. They're still under the supervision of the court. They still have a public defender. They're still a prosecutor. But the idea is to understand what's going on. Why is this happening over and over? And addressing those needs while holding them accountable. And so we have a whole bunch of courts now. We have a community court, a veterans court, a driving under the influence court, and we're just about to start a domestic violence court. And what those courts do is they figure out answers to people. So community court's the broadest one, and that's working with people who commit crimes downtown. And do they need housing? Do they need mental health? Do they need substance abuse treatment? Do they need job training? What is it that they need? And they stay in the court, and they're regularly in touch, and they're connected with services until they graduate out, which means everybody comes together and says, you are ready. And that everybody includes the police, and includes the prosecutor, and includes community members and victims of crimes. They come together and say, this person's ready, and they go out. Our veterans court, we refer people who are veterans who have committed misdemeanor crimes to the Veterans Forum, where it is populated by veterans who serve as mentors for people who are struggling with PTSD or something else, and they are, committing acts that we define as crimes, and we, again, get them support and get them. Driving under the influence is very focused on treatment and getting them. And we're just about to start this domestic violence court, which is one of our biggest problems in Spokane. That instead of just sort of belittling and othering perpetrators, they're held accountable, but they go into a treatment that is going to uplift them and figure out how they got to the place that they are. So that's what we're up to on there. I want to mention climate chaos a bit, because it is certainly around, and there's no doubt about it here. But I was just struck, again, by kind of the dichotomy of climate issues in Spokane, which are around water and smoke mostly. We did last year, several people died of heat, and that was kind of a wake-up call. But it was, I think, around 20 people. Just in today's paper, there's a story, 1,000 people died in the monsoons in Pakistan. And that's just Pakistan. Literally, tens of thousands of people are dying all over the globe every few months from climate chaos. And we don't even connect with that. We don't even know. We have othered the other place. As long as Spokane is okay, we're there. And I'm just struck by that. Like, if we really understood that, we would change our daily lives. But to bring that dichotomy just even a little closer, City Council has been working on the Sustainability Action Plan for Spokane. And we published it, but we spent 3 years coming up with it. Well, a lot of the people who are working on it were your more traditional activist kind of folks. But in the middle of it, we were approached by two different unions who had employees who were working in the fossil fuel industry. And much like the people in the West Hills neighborhood, they're like, well, this is all well and good, but you're going to destroy my livelihood and my ability to take care of my family. If my job goes away, I have a good job. If it goes away, what are we going to do? Where's our place in this circle of human concern? And so what we did, which turned out well, is we invited them to the table. Okay, let's figure that out. And we came up with strategies for retraining and new industries and how it was really going to work in a graduated transition. So it's not like tomorrow, suddenly you're all out of work and trying to figure out how to support your family. But we included them. And is it perfect? Are they completely happy? No. But they were at the table. And it's just a good example of when we come together, we can do that. So we enacted the Spokane Sustainable Action Plan. And I think, again, we probably have the most progressive plan in the state on that, and because it's broad-based and it deals with communities that are impacted all over. The other work that we just did recently was on water conservation. That's another huge issue. As our precipitation in this area turns from snow and snowpack to rain, our river gets drier and drier in the summer. Right now, it is almost at a crisis at this time of year, as it often is. And so we came up with this idea that we should have water conservation so that we could keep our river flowing stronger than it would otherwise. And it was controversial because you might not have realized this, but we are a community of grass clipping farmers. That is our chief agricultural product in Spokane, city of Spokane, certainly. The people are in love with that. And so we have told people, well, those days may be coming to an end to some degree. But we have created something called Spokanescape, which is an online menu of things that you can do that you don't need to have grass. It's still beautiful. It still gives you all the benefit of the yard. It can be cooling for your yard. It can attract wildlife and bees and all those different things. So you can still have it and then, save your soccer playing for the parks and let the taxpayers pay to mow the lawn in the parks for you in there. But we have that Spokanescape, and then we have water conservation, where we're basically, what our water department has determined, and they're not activists, is that most people overwater their lawns. They just do. And you only need to water your lawn probably 4 days a week at most, for about 15 minutes a station at most. And then, so starting next year, that's going to become the law. During the summer months. And then if the river really goes down, it goes to 2 days a week. And that, there'll be some lawns that suffer on 2 days a week. There will, but people won't die, which is really the point of it. The last area I wanted to talk about is interpersonal othering. And this is the more traditional othering: person of color, their gender identity, their sexual orientation, their age, their abilities. And the thing that I've been thinking about on that is a new place is twofold. One, everybody's where they're at on their journey on that. And the great news is, unlike not too many years ago, everyone's talking about it. It is out there. People are talking about it. It is an issue. People's understanding is at different places. I've raised in Oakland, California, which is pretty diverse, come from a family that divorced and remarried and multicultural, multiracial family. I have plenty of cousins and siblings that are married to people of different races and cultures. And then I'm a civil rights attorney. And so I would have thought like that I would really understand this diversity and inclusion. And what I find is that each year I don't. I learn something else. And I need to extend that grace to everybody, especially the people that don't have the advantages that I did of those kinds of understanding. But here's the thing that I think Spokane could use some help on. There's this idea that, well, as long as I'm not a racist and not being racist in what I do, I'm good to go. And that's really not the work. So that's great if we're not being a racist. But it's really about being an anti-racist and looking at hundreds of years of misogyny against women and racism against people of color and ableism about people with disabilities and mental health conditions, and saying, what can I do? What can I do to help that person belong? What can I do to give them agency or empowerment? So it really comes back to, I see you. So it is not enough to simply be part of the problem. We have to be part of the solution. And we're doing two things at City Council. One is, in some ways, kind of a simple thing, but it's a huge thing, and that is language access. Our public schools speak dozens and dozens of languages in our schools, which means their parents speak dozens of languages. And some of them can read and speak English, but many cannot or is not comfortable. And so we are upgrading our ability at the city, and the mayor has joined us in this, I'm happy to report, of having, for the most frequently spoken languages, documents, web pages that are translated into that, and then making available translators for people who need city services. We're just trying to open those doors to help people belong and have some agency in their lives. The other thing that we are doing, I'm very proud of, is called the Office of Civil Rights, Equity, and Inclusion. And several years ago, many city council members, we were like, we updated our civil rights laws in the city to make them even stronger than the state and federal laws. But we realized that we had no department, nobody to do anything about it. So it's great that it says you can't discriminate on housing or employment, but if there's nobody there to do anything or help people or do education, what do you have? And so we begged the then Mayor Condon to hire someone, and we said, we'll fund them, and didn't happen. And Mayor Woodward saying just wasn't a priority. But we had some budget wrangling a year ago, and we basically said, if you want your economic development director funded, you're gonna have to fund this office. And so we did that and hired an interim person, Jarrell Haynes, who used to be the president of the Spokane School Board, great person, and he's the interim, and we funded a 3-person department, and now they're interviewing for the director and then the other positions. And so going forward, pace of government, a few months from now, they will be staffed and out there engaged in the community and looking on issues of inclusion. Again, it is not enough to speak the words. It is to look at all our city operations. Where are we not including people? How can we empower people? How can we help people belong? And the last little dichotomy that I wanted to raise on this issue was, again, kind of my own ability to other people. Several years ago, before COVID, I was invited to go to the National Day of Prayer breakfast locally. And, I'm a politician, so I'm like, all right, I better go. And I went. I had all sorts of preconceptions. I was raised in the evangelical churches, and so I had lots of things. But I'm like, okay, I'll go. But I was so shocked because the whole theme of the whole program was racial inclusion in a big way. And it wasn't just that they brought in they did bring in a great guest speaker, but it was the pastors in the room speaking up, the people at all the tables speaking up for racial inclusion. And I realized that I, again, had othered this group and put them in a category of, yeah, I got no time of day for them. So I was struck that I have much to learn about othering as I try to help people belong more. So I hope, as I finish up here, I hope that you will join me in the campaign for a new motto. In Spokane, we all belong. In Spokane, we all belong. And then I hope, in addition, that you will join me today and going forward in manifesting that truth in Spokane, that we all belong. So join me in starting to recognize where I am othering other people and discounting them, and then working really hard to see how I can empower people, how I can help them make belong, and talk to my neighbors and family members and coworkers when something is a little bit off, so that we can proactively make Spokane into a little more of the beloved community in our lifetimes. Thank you.
Well, we're going to sing a hymn that I think is easy to sing. It's an old Gaelic tune. I picked this hymn because it really embodies our values and our goals, where most of us, we're all someplace on that road where we need to move toward the ideals that we have, and this reminds us of them. So please stand as you're willing and able to sing number 298, Wake Now My Senses.
As we close today, I want to share these closing thoughts. We need to make compassion a clear, luminous, and dynamic force in our polarized world. Rooted in determination to transcend selfishness, compassion can break down political, dogmatic, and ideological and religious boundaries. And born of our deep interdependence, compassion is essential to the human relationships and to a fulfilled humanity. It is the path to enlightenment and indispensable to the creation of a just economy and a peaceful global community. Amen. Blessed be. Salam alaikum and shalom.